Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Today I'm looking at a book from Edward Elgar which has come to us, Edward Elgar Publishing Limited. It's part of the Elgar Financial Law and Practice series, and the title is FinTech, Law and Regulation. I'll explain a bit more about that in a minute. It's been edited by Jelena Madir, and I thought the book would be of great interest to both practitioners and the more detailed sort of research study people, but certainly it was a book that attracted our attention. Now, Elizabeth was the lead writer on this review, and she came up with the title FinTech and the Law. Just about everything you wanted to know is now revealed in this new book. It's available as a hardback and of course also as an ebook. Let's have a look at it. Here we go. It's a hardback. I go front page there, spine, and not too much on the back. A little bit, quite a lot of interesting stuff if you can read it. But again, this reversing out is not the easiest way of reading stuff. The back of the book has some quotes, which are quite interesting about the book itself. And then you do get a useful index, which is by paragraph numbering. The index is reasonably substantial. And as I say, I'm just getting to the front of it here. You can see the beginning of the index. It's quite small. You should be able to find what you're looking for quite quickly. It runs to nearly 500 pages in total, 19 chapters. Excuse me. You can see there's a bit of footnoting, and there is paragraph numbering, so you should be able to find what you're looking for pretty quickly, depending on what you're actually after. This explains a little bit about the series that Elgar produced on financial law and practice. There are a number of books building up now into their series there, and that's the front page. And Jelena, of course, is the Chief Counsel for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. There's the blurb about Elgar there. Then you've got the contents section. You can see how it's structured. There's parts. Part 1, payment, alternative financing and crypto assets. Part 2, blockchain and distributed ledgers. Part 3, regulation and compliance, and Part 4, technological innovations in legal services. I think the last part is going to be quite interesting, certainly to younger people, because of the massive changes that are taking place. Then you've got an extended contents, a lot more detail, and again, as I say, you can see how it's done, how it's actually produced, and you've got the names of the people who are the contributors underneath the actual titles. Then you've got some figures and some tables, and then after that you've got a list of the editors and the contributors. So the editor rather and the contributors. Quite a large number of people involved in this, as you can see. I can't mention all their names, unfortunately, but you can see a lot of people have put their points across. Then there's a useful preface from Jelena at the beginning. Always worth reading the preface because it sets the style of the book. FinTech has become an inescapable buzzword in the last few years. The term is popularly used to describe internet and smartphone-enabled financial innovations that have risen to prominence since the 2008 global financial crisis. So you can see this is very much a book for our times. What is useful for everybody, including me and also everybody else, is all these words. Some of them are really quite difficult to follow, so there's a glossary. I did think that was very useful because, frankly, there are a lot of abbreviations and words which are really quite difficult to understand in this area. And it's a fast-moving area, I hasten to add, so it's useful to have this for people, older people like me, who probably are going to find some of this a little bit difficult to follow sometimes. I mean, I come from a very traditional background, and therefore I'm finding it a little difficult sometimes to grasp what they're talking about. But you get there in the end. Although I think the last two, UK and US, I think we know what they are. I hope we do. Although US is United States of America, so I would have said it would be USA if one wants to be pedantic, but I don't. Table of cases, there we go, by country. And then you've got some legislation as well, again, and directives, again by country, lists of statutes, of course. Then what you've got is a rather nice structure here, because you've got a little index for each of the chapters, which I think does help trying to find things quite easily. You can see how it's done there. Then you've got the paragraph numbering at the sides there. And then, of course, you can probably just make that out, little footnote. Then as you go through, you can see, again, the standard style, house style all the way through, footnotes at the bottom and paragraph numbering at the side. As I said, the index is by paragraph numbering. Here we go, that's the book. Now, what do we say? Well, as I say, Elizabeth was we had a discussion about the book, and Elizabeth came up with what I thought was a lot of very sensible points, mainly because I suspect quite a lot of people may not know too much about what this area is about. So let me explain it. What is FinTech? Those of us not exactly in the know might well ask, and therefore appreciate, the succinct yet detailed explanation helpfully provided in the introduction to this book by Jelena Madir, published by Edward Elgar Publishing Limited. The book goes on from there to cover a broad spectrum of FinTech-related issues. And let me just explain where we are. The subject is a diverse and complex one. Much of what has been written about it reads like science fiction. But no, FinTech is with us in the here and now, functioning efficiently, this is definitely an indispensable book, and ever on the brink of further development, which I alluded to at the beginning, especially with part 4, because this is the field in which the future for lawyers has become the present, which is why practitioners involved in any aspect of FinTech, or who plan to be, should get hold of this book, we think. This is referred to in the editor's preference is the technology-driven metamorphosis of the financial services sector, which continues to push the boundaries of the traditional areas of law. Very well said, because I think there are some really confusing things that are happening since, of course, the major crash of 2008. I'm recording this 11 years afterwards, and we're still looking at the moment at big changes until we get into the roaring 2020s. So it should be quite interesting. Basically, the term FinTech refers to internet and smartphone enabled financial innovations, as I referred to. It's the main thrust of it at the beginning, and it's these innovations that have arisen to prominence since we had the crash in 2008. Now, as FinTech, not tack, but tech, encompasses financial products and services delivered to customers in, for example, banking, insurance and investments and more, issues of consumer protection in the face of technological change do come to mind and are discussed extensively. I'm glad they do, because I can tell you in court there can be really big problems, because we recognise the technological change, but I don't think practice and procedure, and some of the views the judges have expressed to me clearly show this. I just don't think that we're actually keeping up with it all. So I think it's useful to have this sort of book to get an idea of where we're going. Now, the book's divided logically into 4 parts, and it provides expert commentary from no less than 31 expert contributors. And by way of introduction, part 1 explains the various applications of FinTech within such areas as banking and fundraising, including crowdfunding. Part 2 deals with the applications of blockchain and the attendant legal and regulatory challenges, which are then examined in more detail in part 3. Here, of course, the focus is on the main regulatory and compliance issues, in which the editors refer to as, quote, the heightened pressure to strike a sensible balance between innovation and consumer protection. I'm glad they say that, because I sometimes question how much regulation we're going to have in some of these areas, when in other areas there's no regulation at all. It makes you wonder sometimes where the balance is actually being found by the governments of the day. And I say that because I think consumer protection is actually a very important part of what we're going to be looking at in the next decade. Let me conclude by saying this: especially relevant for lawyers is part 4, which discusses technological innovations in legal services, comparing it in particular with legal tech and fintech. And of course, much emphasis is placed on the need for lawyers to understand the technology with a view to developing the skill sets required in the marketplace of the future. Now, again, I'm referring to that because we are going to be looking at the next 30 years, and therefore the skill sets of these generations coming up are going to be, I think, quite different from some of the skill sets that I and my colleagues from the last 50 years have got. Now, I say that because we're all living a lot to a much older age and practicing for much longer, and therefore I'm looking at this now as a person who's been in practice for some time, trying to work out where we will be going in the future and what the marketplace of the future will be like, because there can't be many lawyers out there who wouldn't profit from the insights, advice and information on fintech which is delivered by this book. And I'd like to thank certainly Jelena for bringing everyone together, and of course to Elgar for the financial law and practice area. This is a useful area for practitioners and a useful area for the wider readership as well. The publication date of the hardback book is cited as at the 2nd of September 2019, and it's also available as a hardback book. As an ebook, as well as the hardback book, I should say. I'd like to thank everybody, as I say. It's a very interesting book. There it is. Let's just have a quick look at it again. The side and then the back. Just opening it in the middle. It's a heavy book, actually. Opening it in the middle. Cyber attack case studies. You see, we're dealing now with a very different era of problems. The question again would be, these are civil matters, of course, but should they be criminal? And if they were, how are they going to police it? You've got all sorts of issues that are going to crop up, which is the changing face of our law, basically. You've got the footnotes there, as you can see. You've got paragraph numbering. But you can see they're dealing with some very important matters, because cyber attacks are a very important thing. They damage a company, but they also involve the public sector. So you can see the difficulties. For instance, we've got here the Ukraine cases from 2015 and 17. You see, even a few years ago, we wouldn't really be thinking too much about how global everything has become. Anyway, thank you to Elgar. Thank you to Jelena. This is a very competent work, and I'm sure we will probably be looking at a new edition before too long. Perhaps I should not say too much more than that. But thank you to all concerned for an excellent book. Bye-bye.